J'ouvre maintenant la
I call this meeting to order.
clerk so I can hear somebody echoing me as I speak. Anyway, j'ouvre maintenant.
I call this meeting to order. Welcome. Welcome to meeting number 67 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. And I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people.
Hybrid format, as we all know, more hybrid, more virtual than ever, pursuant to the House order of Thursday, June the 23rd. And while public health authorities and the Board of Internal Economy no longer require mask wearing indoors or on the precinct, masks and respirators are still excellent tools to prevent the spread of COVID and other respiratory diseases, and is strongly encouraged. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind all participants of this meeting that screenshots are not allowed. Taking photos of your screen is not permitted. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. I've called this meeting today pursuant to Standing Order 1064 to discuss a request to undertake a study of the censoring of news content by Google. And as required, that 1064 had been signed by the required 6 signatures. We will now begin by opening the floor to the members who have submitted the request for this meeting. Chris Biddle.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And seeing the stories, I think it was the Canadian Press that released it, and it's troubling that Google was doing this in secret to begin with, but was caught by the press who asked the questions, and we found the answers. It's especially troubling in light of what we saw what Facebook did in Australia, that it was an intimidation tactic by Facebook against the Australian people, an intimidation tactic against their parliament to see if they could reverse what was going on there. Similar legislation to what we passed. And I think it's important for Parliament to take a look and see what Google is doing. Don't particularly like their track record on this. It's a company that has not necessarily been responsible, but at the same time does not want any regulation. So I do have a motion. We have provided it to the other parties, and I believe it has been emailed out to everyone, but I will read it out. That pursuant to Standing Order 108 sub 2, the committee undertake a study into the activities of Google in relation to Bill C-18, including but not limited to the decision by Google to test the blocking of news sites in Canada. That pursuant to Standing Order 108 sub 1 sub A, the committee summoned Kent Walker, President of Global Affairs and Chief Legal Officer at Alphabet Inc., Richard Gringas, Vice President of News at Google, and Sabrina Jeremia, VP and Country Manager for Google in Canada, to testify for a 2-hour meeting on Monday, March 6, 2023. That the committee order Alphabet Inc. and all of its subsidiaries, including Google, to provide any and all internal or external communication, including but not limited to emails, text, or other forms of messages related to actions planned to take or options considered in relation to Canada's Bill C-18, including but not limited to those in relation to the testing and blocking of news sites in Canada. B, a list of all news organizations blocked by Google in Canada, and that this be delivered to the committee no later than 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday, March 2nd. Again, I won't go on too often. I appreciate the feedback from opposition members on this motion. It's something we need to look into. It's something that is troubling. I know we've seen these actions by foreign tech giants around the world. And again, it's important that Canadian Parliament look into it and that we stand up for Canadians. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I will now entertain open debate on this. I notice Martin has his hand up. Martin?
Merci.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairperson. I agree entirely with the approach that's being suggested in the motion. However, in the French version, there's something that needs to be corrected. Faisal, you're not on mute. Can I proceed? So, as I was saying, Madam Chairperson, there are two minor corrections that don't change the meaning of the text, but just to make sure that the motion is perfect, in the second to last paragraph, it says that the committee order Alphabet Inc. and all of its subsidiaries, including... No, I'm sorry, it's the previous paragraph, the second paragraph, that the committee summoned Kent Walker, president of Global Affairs and Chief, etc., etc. So it's convoqué à témoigner in French, or pour témoigner. That's the typo. The other correction is by way of clarification when it talks about external communications, texts, emails, other forms of messaging. I think we should specify that it's message text. So that would specify that it's text messages and not just any kind of text. And in all other respects, I support the motion moved by my colleague.
You were on mute, Madam Chair.
Sorry, I'm muted. Sorry, Peter.
Merci beaucoup.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. And I fully support Mr. Champoul's clarifications in the French version of the motion. And I also support the motion itself. It sets us on the right path as to what we need to do as a committee.
Perplexing that when they saw how things backfired in Australia around the reaction of big tech, it is perplexing that Google would do something.
Rappel au règlement, Madame la Présidente.
On a point of order, Peter, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'm being told that the meeting is not being broadcast on Parlevue currently. Is it? Mike, could you please double check? I want to make sure.
Bon, on m'écrit que...
Well, I'm being told that the problem has been fixed. Thank you. Apparently it took quite a bit of time, but it's done. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you, Peter. My apologies.
C'est correct, Monsieur.
No, absolutely, Mr. Champoul. I do want to double check with the clerk. Has this meeting been broadcast since the very beginning, since the gavel was hit? Well, there's a short lag of about a minute. It's not live streaming per se, but it's all there, but there is a short lag. But what you're saying is that Mr. Bittle's motion and his opening remarks were broadcast on Parlevue? Excellent. Well, that's, of course, important that the Canadian public be aware of what we are currently discussing. So that's good.
Just saying that Google's reaction, attempt at intimidation is perplexing because it didn't work in Australia. The big tech has social responsibility, and big tech has the responsibility to obey the laws of the country in which they are reaping huge profits. And Google's attempt to try to censor and to try to block certain sites is something certainly that is backfiring. I've heard more negative comments about Google in the last few days than I've heard in many years. It was a irresponsible act, and it is time that Google executives be brought forward to explain their actions. This committee has been a committee that's functioned on consensus, has done, I think, remarkable work. We saw that with Hockey Canada. Similar situation of an organization, institution that was not prepared to act in a responsible way. We've certainly seen some impacts even with our invitation summons to Canada Soccer. And for Google to come forward and explain themselves to Canadians, I think is something that this committee, I believe, should be looking at passing unanimously to show that same force of will as parliamentarians to ensure that massive companies like Google are held to account for their actions. I deplore their actions. I think Google has acted in a very irresponsible way, and I support this motion as a way of allowing us to question them on behalf of Canadians for the actions that they've taken over the last few weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. And are there any? I don't see any other hands up.
Ms. Thomas.
Oh, yes. Sorry, Ms. Thomas. Ah, there you are. Okay, you shifted on my screen. Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Sure, I guess I'm just wanting to check in here. I do have an amendment that I would like to propose, but I believe I may stand corrected, but I believe Mr. Shampoo also put a couple of minor amendments on the table. No?
No, he didn't. He just corrected the translation.
Okay, so there's no vote needed with regards to what Mr. Shampoo is putting forward. It's just, okay, no. Perfect. Okay, great. Then I guess the dialogue that I would wish to have with my colleagues is just around the language of the motion. And so right now it reads that we would summon these individuals to come to committee. Now, on the one hand, I understand the urgency. I think there's a desire to have Google come for Monday. And so given that urgency, I think, we're kind of skipping steps 1 and 2 and just going right to 3, which is to summon rather than invite. But I do wonder if that is how we want to conduct ourselves as a committee. It does feel rather forceful, whereas I think, Google has internal motivation and even external motivation based on, their business in Canada to show up. And so I wonder if, there would be appetite around the table to amend the language to simply say that we would invite or request Google to come for Monday's meeting.
Any comments on Ms. Thomas's comment? Yes, Anthony? Mr. Housefather?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and I appreciate very much Rachel's comment. And I think in general, that would be the approach that I think we would all take. And we would first invite, but because of the timing, because of the desire to have them here on Monday, which is next Monday, I don't believe we would have the option of inviting, and if they didn't come, holding a second meeting to summon them on time to have them here on Monday. I'm also
Anthony, est-ce que c'est possible de baisser?
Anthony, could you just push your microphone down a tad because I'm having trouble. Is that better for the interpretation? I apologize.
I think we would have time to summon them again. And that is why I believe it would be better to summon them at the beginning. I also am concerned that we have specifically requested 3 people from Google. And if we simply invited, I would not be surprised that Google would only send Canadian representatives and would not send people from head office, where I think the decisions are actually made. So I entirely respect the request made by my colleague, Mrs. Thomas. I just think because of timing and the extraordinary nature of things, I would rather summon them to begin with, because I think otherwise we wouldn't have them on Monday for sure. And I want to make sure we have them on Monday for sure. But I do respect the request, and in normal context, I would have agreed with it.
Thank you, Anthony. Is Martin's hand up? Martin?
Oui, mais...
Yes, but Peter had raised his hand before me. Go ahead, Peter.
Sorry, Peter.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Champoux. I too, and Ms. Thomas just raised an important point here, but given the time frame, things are tight, and I don't think we have any other choice but to summon the witnesses for the reasons that Mr. Housefather just laid out. It strikes me that that would be the logical way to proceed, even though I sympathise with what Ms. Thomas just said.
Raise one point, and Mr. Biddle may want to speak to this, or he may want to accept this as a friendly amendment. We do not have on the list Sundar Pichai, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Google, and I am wondering if Mr. Biddle would accept that fourth name, an important part of the Google team, as part of his motion.
Chris?
No issues. I'd accept that as a friendly amendment.
Although there is no such thing as a friendly amendment, I think we're just going to have to take it as an amendment and know that it's going to pass. But before we get there, Martin, Mr. Shampoo.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I also agree with the fact that there are no friendly amendments, but I do agree with Peter's amendment nevertheless. And I also agree with Ms. Thomas's proposal. I think under normal circumstances we would invite Google, but at this current juncture and in light of the manoeuvring that Google seems to be engaging in lately, I think that time is running out. We want answers quickly. These are serious issues. We have major misgivings. These are thorny issues. Google is using stratagems that it threatened to use during the study of the bill, that the government was going to promote disinformation with a bill like Bill C-18, the other arguments that they made, and this came up regularly in meetings, that the government was deciding in and of itself what Canadians would see and not see. So what Google is doing by limiting some content makes me really afraid. I find this really, really worrying. I want to know in short order what the real reasons are behind this operation. It smacks of intimidation and bullying rather than a business strategy. And I'd like to know what the criteria were that were used in terms of blocking and authorizing certain content. These are crucial issues of great concern. It doesn't seem like Google, does it? Google was opposed to the bill and in the implementation of this kind of legislation, but it always said that it would comply with the regulations, and that's what it does in other countries of the world mostly, and I think that we should summon them as quickly as possible so that they can justify themselves. I have no doubt whatsoever about this need.
Thank you very much, Martin. If seeing no other hands up, I think that maybe, yes, Rachel?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I understand the argument around the table, and so I won't push for a formal vote on that. But I would make another amendment or proposal, and that is this. Google.
Excuse me, sorry, Rachel. I think we have Peter Julian's amendment with the addition of the head of Google, Sanjay. Would you like us to deal with that, and then we can deal with yours? So, Peter, can you just say your amendment? That's okay.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. It would be the addition of Sundar Pichai, who's the CEO of Google.
Now, all right. So shall I call the vote on the amendment? Anyone opposing? I see no opposition, so the amendment passes. So we now have the amended motion. And now, Rachel, you wanted to add something.
Yes, sorry, thank you, Chair. Sure, so the proposal that I would put forward is one of the things that came out in the article that was put forward, the initial article with regards to the decision made by Google. In their response, they've pointed to various components in the legislation in order to kind of justify the decision that they've made. And so I wonder if there would be appetite to bring officials to committee as well. So basically what this would allow us to do is, yes, questions are mostly going to be directed at Google, but it would also allow us to then direct questions to the officials in order to verify, okay, Google is claiming this, is it true? And so you're kind of able to do both at once, where you're able to get, Google's insights and their opinions and, their decision-making process, their reasons, but then also you're able to verify, what the legislation really does do and whether or not Google really is, acting within the framework that it's claiming to. And so my proposal would be that officials would be from the Heritage Department who would be able to speak to the legalities of this legislation would also be present for the duration of this committee.
Thank you. Pretty clear amendment. Any discussion? Chris.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I'm opposed to this amendment. This is about Google. This is about what Google has done, the actions it has undertaken. It has to answer to legislators. It has to answer to Canadian democracy. Its attempts to avoid regulation, not only in Canada, but around the world, is disappointing. I guess not surprising for a large company like this seeking to avoid regulation, but this isn't the time to muddy the water with officials. This is the time for Google to answer to members of Parliament as to what they did, what they're planning to do, and the actions that they're taking. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Julian. Peter?
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Now, Ms. Thomas's amendment is a tad premature to my mind. We really need to question Google over their actions, which are irresponsible. And I don't think anyone in Canada supports their actions, especially given the failure of the very same strategy in Australia. This seems to be poorly thought through. It smacks of a lack of respect towards Canadians. That certain Canadians would be censored and they would have trouble getting the information that they want and need. So it's crucial to question Google. That is the principle behind this motion and the whole reason for holding the meeting. Now, were we to continue down the track, and I would have no opposition to extending the study, then we could have officials of the government, department officials appear. But given we're talking about a special meeting of this committee that would be held, and in light of today's emergency meeting, I think we need to focus on questioning Google, and that's why I am going to stand against this amendment at this current point. But perhaps further down the track, we may have other meetings, and potentially at that point, I might have a different opinion. Thank you.
I'm muted again. Sorry, Rachel, your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair. Sure. Again, I understand the arguments that have been put on the table. The intent is not to distract from Google and what's going on there. The intent would simply be to supplement. And so I do wonder if the committee then would perhaps entertain that we bring Google for the full 2 hours, followed with an hour with officials. Again, I do see great value in being able to follow up the statements that Google is making with an authoritative body that is able to speak to the credibility of Google's claims and whether or not certain components are in the legislation.
Any further discussion on this? If not, I will call the question on Ms. Thomas's amendment, which was to add Heritage Canada officials to the meeting that we would be having with Google. Though anyone opposed to that? Yes. Maybe we can call the question, clerk, please.
Okay, I'll begin with Mrs. Thomas as she moved the motion. Mrs. Thomas.
In favor.
Mr. Waugh.
In favor.
Ms. Gladue,
In favor.
Mr. Zimmer,
In favor.
Mr. Biddle,
Opposed.
Monsieur El Khoury,
You are muted, figure.
Monsieur El Khoury,
You are muted.
I think his boom isn't in front of his.
Can
mouth.
you move this into your front of your face? Yeah, cool. Can you
I'll-
give a thumbs up or down?
There we go. Well, I'm going to
right,
interpret that
okay,
as a no.
thank you.
Ms. Hepfner,
I am opposed. Thanks.
Mr. Housefather,
Opposed.
Mr. Miao,
Oppose.
Monsieur Champoux,
Je vote contre.
Mr. Julian,
Opposé, contre. No.
4 yeas, 6 nays.
Well, the amendment is defeated, so we now have the amended motion that Mr. Biddle originally put forward. And I think if there is any further discussion about that motion, if there isn't, I'd like to move on to another motion that we have on the table.
I think we need to vote on the amended motion, Madam Chair.
On the amended motion, sorry, Anthony. So shall I call the vote on the amended motion? Those in favor of the amended motion, if there's anyone opposed, let me see. To the amended motion, no one's opposed, so we don't need to call the vote. So the motion passes as amended. Thank you. And now I think we have another motion on the table, Mr. Housefather, I believe.
Well, Madam Chair, I had my hand up. It's
Oh,
Kevin.
I'm sorry, Kevin.
No,
I
that's fine.
I didn't see your hand.
I just have a question. What happens if Google, because these people are coming from the United States, most of them, don't show up on
Well,
Monday?
It's my understanding that if we summon them, that they are in whatever what is it? They're in contempt of Parliament. Clerk, will you correct me?
Well, actually, if I couldn't clarify, any individuals not residing in Canada or not present in Canada, the summons would have no force. The committee's powers and privileges are limited to the physical borders of Canada. So if anybody is elsewhere on the planet, our summons has little to no effect. If they are in Canada and they receive the summons and they do not appear, then the committee can report that matter to the House, and then it would be up to the House to decide if this is a matter of, if it is contempt. And if it is contempt, then the House would, someone would move an appropriate remedy, maybe call the person to the House. Speaker at Arms could send a bailiff to get them. But it's entirely, if someone ignores a summons, it's completely up to the House to deal with it. The committee would have to report it first, and then the House would deal with it.
Madam Chair, with the Google representatives coming, and I believe they were all from the United States, I think it would be wise for us to include a Canadian that works for Google. That way we would have assurances that somebody from Google would be attending the meeting on Monday. Thoughts on that?
Chris, do you have any names that you feel might be added?
I think Anthony's hands up to address the point.
Anthony, go ahead. And then Martin.
There is a Canadian on the list. Sabrina is Canadian. She's the country manager for Canada. So that is covered. There is a Canadian. Thanks.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you for clarification. Thank you.
Martin?
I was going to say the same thing, and Richard Gingras is a francophone name. I would assume that he might be in Canada too, but indeed Ms. Garemia is well and truly in Canada. Now, just to tack on to what Kevin was saying, were we to summon folks who are not physically in Canada at the time of summons, Well, will they have trouble entering Canada if they haven't responded to a committee summons? Anthony's saying yes, Mike's saying no. I'll allow you to fight among yourselves, gentlemen.
Anthony, go ahead.
I think I'll let Mike chime in, but if they come to Canada, the committee can then seek to enforce the summons, right? The committee maintains the power when they arrive in Canadian soil to seek to enforce it. It certainly would be something they would consider if they come to Canada frequently, whether or not they accept the invitation of the committee. It's certainly, again, as Mike said, we have no power to force somebody. We had that with Zuckerberg when we did that last time. We have no power to force it. But if they ever do come to Canada, we can then actually attempt to enforce it. And it's certainly, I think, given that we have a Canadian on the list, we know that at least she is required to come. And we'll see how the others, comport themselves. Hopefully they'll be cooperative.
Désolé, Anthony.
Sorry, Anthony, on a point of order, we have lost interpretation. I don't know what the problem is, but we've lost interpretation.
J'ai terminé mes paroles,
I had finished, Martin. I'm being told that the sound is inadequate. It's perhaps the position of the boom mic. This is the English interpreter. That is indeed the problem. The boom mic is not properly positioned.
While we kind of look after that with Anthony, I'll move on to Peter Julian, who had his hand up.
Mais là, Madame la Présidente.
Well, but Madam Chairperson, won't there be the same interpretation issue? No, the problem is with Mr. Housefather, says the interpreter. Good. Well, in that case,
it is really important as a committee. It is true that we have to report this to the House, but this is something that these executives have to respond to, and I think if we start to say we will allow Google to replace the decision makers with local-based people, even though one of the people that we are summoning is in Canada, we're sending the wrong message. Google's actions have been irresponsible. Google's actions amount to censorship, and Google's actions are disrespectful of Canadians. And I think we should be prepared as a committee to report this to the House if we have Google executives that show even more disrespect by refusing a summons of a parliamentary committee. This is no small thing. And so I think it's important that we proceed as we should with the intent to push Google to respect this parliamentary committee, ultimately the House of Commons, the Parliament of Canada, and the Canadian people.
Thank you, Peter. But just before I go to Martin, I would like to clarify with Mike, with the clerk. Can the House of Commons, if reported, summons people from outside of Canada? Does that hold? Or do they not have the power?
Well, we can attempt it. I mean, basically what we'd be doing is trying to find some sort of process server to deliver it, to assure the committee that they had indeed received the summons, but the person could completely ignore it. There is no enforceable mechanism for Canada to compel someone to appear at committee as a parliament. They have to be within Canada. That's where the committee and parliament's privileges and powers extend.
Thank you. Martin?
Merci.
Thank you. Well, the motion has carried, and we're going to summons those persons in the motion. What I would suggest is that we wait to see what their response is. We probably won't have all of them come. In fact, it's highly probable that only one or two will turn up. But it's up to the committee to determine whether we're satisfied at that point, and whether after the meeting with the Google representatives that do come, well, then we'll decide whether we want the CEO to come back by way of official channels. But we don't have the power to summon someone outside Canada. Perhaps we can take the chance and see how they respond right off the bat. But after the meeting, if we're satisfied, then we can decide what to do or not to do then. I don't think that the 4 will turn up, frankly speaking.
Thank you. Anthony, did you finish what you had to say? Is your mic working now?
I hope so, Madam Chair. Is there
interpretation? Because Anthony has to read his motion soon, so I'd like to double check if there's interpretation.
Hopefully, yes.
Hopefully. So then, so now we've moved on. Anthony, would you bring forward your motion, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe I had unanimous consent to ask for documents for Soccer Canada. And the motion would be that as part of the committee's safe sports study, the committee orders Soccer Canada to produce an unredacted copy of all contracts, including but not limited to the representation agreement that it has with Canadian soccer business, and that these be provided to the clerk of the committee by Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time on March 3, 2023. And this is just so we can get this very important document before we have Soccer Canada come to speak with us. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any discussion on Anthony's motion? Yes, Peter?
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. And I certainly support the motion. I wanted to potentially add to it and wanted the clerk just to perhaps confirm with me the earliest minutes from Canada Soccer that we have received as a committee.
I'll have to take a minute and check on that. I believe they go back to 2018, but I'll double check.
While you're doing that, have you finished, Peter? Because Kevin's hand is up.
And I'm always interested in hearing from Kevin, for sure. But I'll come back on the list, Madam Chair, once we get the answer in terms of minutes.
Good. Kevin.
Chair, I'm just worried about translation. It has been taking longer to get the translation of any documents that we've received. And so I just throw that to the wind, asking for the documents in 3 days. You can ask for them, but translation is going to be the issue. They are backed up, as we all know. And so I just wanted to raise this, that we may get the documents, but we won't get the translation in time. And thus, we have an issue.
Mike, clerk, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I believe we've distributed the Soccer Canada minutes going back to as far as January 2018. That's as far back as it went.
Yes, Mike, you're right, if I can interject here, but what Anthony is asking is for the unredacted, the Soccer Canada and the soccer business agreement that was signed by Nick Bontis, the former, as of yesterday, the former president of Soccer Canada. So I believe Mr. Housefather wanted to see those, the transaction between the agreement between Soccer Canada and soccer business, because that's where the issue is starting to fall with the issues of our national teams claiming they're, not getting enough money. So that's the issue, I think, and Mr. Housefather, you can correct me, but I think that's the issue. We would like to see the agreements signed between the two parties, and that's why I just thought that Friday, that they might give us the agreements by Friday, but it could take them a while to translate it.
Thank you, Kevin. Peter, your hand is up? Or is that a standing hand?
No. It's not a standing hand, Madam Chair. I put them up and take them down each time. Thanks to our clerk for confirming the January 2018 I would like to add to the motion that we seek the board minutes for 2017 for Canada Soccer. And so if I know you don't allow friendly amendments, but I'm looking at Mr. Housefather, and hopefully he is amenable to that. As part of the issue of getting to the bottom of what's transpired with Canada Soccer, the minutes from 2017, I think, would be valuable to us. Those minutes would have already been put into place. There would be, I don't see any difficulty at all in Canada Soccer providing those by March 3rd as well. Mr. Waugh is right about the issue of translation. We do have about a week in 2 weeks ultimately in terms of getting them translated and getting them to committee. And I think that should be ample time. So I'm hoping that Mr. Housefather is amenable to that amendment, if it can't be a friendly amendment, as something that we add in the board minutes for 2017.
All right. Is that not redundant, Anthony? Because you have already said all contracts, all. That goes as far back as we want it to go, doesn't it?
Peter is asking for board minutes, which is different, Madam Chair.
You're asking for contracts, all right? Okay, so Peter, does everyone hear Peter's amendment, which is in addition contracts, board minutes for 2017? Is there anyone opposed to that amendment? Seeing no hand up, then I think that amendment passes. So we now have an amended motion on the floor. Any further discussion? No? Is anyone opposed to the amended motion as read by Mr. Housefather and as amended by Peter? No opposition, so the amended motion passes. Thank you very much. Good. What a great committee to have today. Wow. You guys are like moving along nicely. So given that is so, is there any further business that anyone wanted to discuss with regard to these issues? No? I see heads shaking. Yeah.
If I may, Madam Chairperson, without wanting to be unpleasant, listen, we have interpreters that do an exceptional job, and we really rely on them to understand each other, and not just to committee members, but folks listening to us virtually. Anthony's sound quality made the interpreter's job tough today, and I know that he cares about this issue. I know that full well. But if we could just ensure that when there is virtual participation, that we conduct the proper sound tests so that things flow more smoothly during our meetings, and it would also mean that interpreters wouldn't have to suspend service as they go along because of our internet connectivity or the equipment we're using or the position of that equipment. It would take perhaps an additional 5 minutes before the start of each meeting. We're not just talking about the health and safety of interpreters, but also the fluidity of our meeting so that we wouldn't have to interrupt the meeting each and every time there was a issue of this kind. So I just wanted to draw this issue to your attention, Madam Chair, to the attention of the chairperson, or the clerk, so that interpreters can properly do their job. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Very effective and appropriate solution, Martin. I see Rachel and Peter. I don't know whose hands went up first because I was watching Martin as he spoke. Fascinating to watch Martin as he speaks. But whose hand was up first, Rachel or Peter?
Madame Thomas.
All right, go ahead, Rachel.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Just really quick here. Sorry, just seeking a point of clarification, and that is it the will of the committee then that we would go ahead and hear from Soccer Canada, regardless of whether or not we have these documents translated, or are we putting ourselves in a situation where we are going to wait for translation before hearing from Soccer Canada? I am concerned about the time that is potentially going to require.
Well, could we have the mover of the motion speak to that, Martin? Anthony? Are we prepared to go ahead if we do not have the translated documents?
Madam Chair, I believe we have already invited Soccer Canada and the clerk has confirmed them. I was not intending to delay that, but I do hope the contracts are the first things translated and that they can get to us relatively quickly.
Thank you. Peter.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. And I think we should be okay with the 2-week time frame, translation-wise. Now, I'd like to agree with what Mr. Champoux just said. We have the Jabra headsets, which are extremely effective, such that interpreters can properly do their jobs. And I just want to reiterate this because it's important. We have the Jabra headsets. We should be using them. If you don't have a Jabra headset, you can order one from House Administration. It's crucial that the workplace be safe for interpreters. And as a committee, I think that we should agree among ourselves that we will not participate in a committee meeting if we don't have our Jabra headset or another headset that's improved by House Administration. And the same applies to witnesses. We really need to insist on this. We have a hybrid parliament, and the fact of the matter is that it works well when we use the proper headsets that are designed for a hybrid parliament and that will protect our interpreters' health and safety. So I just want to underscore Mr. Champoux's remarks. I agree entirely with him. We really must need to value the health and safety of our interpreters. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Peter. I think that Martin not only spoke to the issue of using the appropriate headset for the safety of interpreters, but he wanted to continue to let the meeting be fluid. And so what I think he was suggesting is that at the beginning of the meeting, everyone have a sound check and take the 5 minutes necessary to have a sound check with everyone. So I think he was also asking for that, which I think is quite a wise decision. Kevin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to Martin and Peter bringing that up. I just had a clarification. I think the motion, Anthony, you said the current president of Soccer Canada. Well, yesterday, Mr. Bontas resigned. They don't have a current president. So is it possible that we just name the person that we want to come? I might be off a little bit, but I think you said current president of Soccer Canada. Well, they don't have one as of yesterday. So, and they may not have one for several months. So I am a little concerned about the wording of it.
Anthony, would you like to respond? Because if we're speaking to the motion you just brought in, it doesn't say anything about current president, does it?
This is an excellent point. This was Peter's motion from last meeting, and I think he might want to correct that to name Mr. Bontas now, given Kevin's excellent point.
Peter?
If Mr. Housefather wanted to move that, I think that would be a clarification of the motion we adopted.
Would you like to move that, Anthony? Well, go ahead and move it. Say it in words. So we have it clear.
So I would move that the committee invite, and if he does not accept, summon Nick Bontas to appear before it.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Kevin?
Yes, it does. We could have been caught on a technicality here. So thank you, Mr. Julian, for giving it to Mr. Housefather, even though I brought it up. I probably should have been the one that did the motion, but it doesn't matter. It's done. And that's where this look into Soccer Canada has to start, with Mr. Bontas as past president. So well done.
Thank you. Peter, is your hand up again? Or is it still up? It's up. Okay, go
no,
ahead.
it's a new app. Just to give full credit to Mr. Wah for having identified that weakness, and I think we consider Mr. Wah the inspiration for the motion that we've just adopted.
So thank you, seeing that there is no further business, I wanted to congratulate the committee on being so cooperative and congenial. It's really nice. So thank you. And with that, I declare the meeting adjourned. See you guys on Monday. Bye.
Bye-bye.